Coming up on The World Today, Hong Kong security legislation backed by China's parliament. U.S. city of Minneapolis sees second night of clashes over death of a black man in police custody. Plus, France set to roll out contact tracing app. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. China's parliament has backed security legislation for Hong Kong, which would make it a crime to undermine Beijing's authority in the territory. The resolution, which now passes to China's senior leadership, has caused deep concern among those who say it could end Hong Kong's unique status. It could also see China's installation in its own security agencies in the region for the first time. The move has already sparked a new wave of anti-mainland protests. Clashes broke out on Wednesday as Hong Kong's parliament debated a different proposed law, which would make it a crime to disrespect the Chinese national anthem. Hundreds of people were arrested in protest over that and the security law. Well, security still remains high in Hong Kong as a tense debate in the Legislative Council continues. Scuffles broke out in today's session, leading to at least 2 pro-democracy legislators being ejected from the council. One lawmaker, Ted Wee, threw rotten plants onto the floor of the chamber, saying it symbolized the decay of Hong Kong's political system. The speaker deemed the package to be an unknown dangerous object and called police and fire crews. Teddy Chu, another member of Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp, was taken out of the chamber after holding a placard mocking the pro-establishment lawmakers, Starry Lee. The Legislative Council was later adjourned. We'll have more on the Hong Kong security law, but in the meantime, police and protesters have clashed for a second night in the U.S. city of Minneapolis after an unarmed black man died in police custody. Tear gas was fired by police while protesters threw rocks and sprayed graffiti. Businesses were also looted. George Floyd died on Monday, and video showed him gasping for breath as a white policeman knelt on his neck. 4 police officers have been fired, with the mayor saying that being black should not be a death sentence. The renewed clashes on Wednesday came just hours after the city's mayor called for criminal charges to be brought against the policeman who was filmed holding Mr. Floyd. There was also looting and vandalism, with some buildings close to the demonstrations being destroyed by fire. Over to the COVID-19 pandemic now. In less than 4 months, the United States has passed 100,000 deaths in the coronavirus outbreak. That's more fatalities than any other country, while its 1.69 million confirmed infections account for about 30% of all cases worldwide. This also means that around as many Americans have died from COVID-19 as from the Korea, Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan wars combined. But with nearly 39 million Americans out of work during the pandemic, the United States is pressing ahead state by state with reopening the coronavirus frozen economy, even as the death toll continues to move upwards. All 50 states have begun to ease COVID-19 rules in some form. Now joining us to talk about the situation in the United States is the VOA's White House Bureau Chief, Steve Ehrman. Steve, thanks for joining us on The World Today.
My pleasure.
This, of course, is a tragic milestone for the United States. What's the mood like in the country at the moment?
Well, it's quite a somber time. A lot of people realize in stark terms now what is the toll of this infection, and it's continuing to increase, although there is a realization, especially in large metropolitan areas like New York City, that the new case rates, the death rates are slowing down, but we are seeing cases rising in other rural areas of the country, such as West Virginia, North Dakota, North Carolina, and where I'm speaking to you from in Northern Virginia, this Washington, D.C. metro area is really one of the hot spots in the country right now for the coronavirus.
Well, over in Spain, the country is on a 10-day mourning period to commemorate those who have lost their lives in the pandemic, and they have a much fewer death toll than the United States. Does the government acknowledge the death toll, and are there any plans to honor the dead?
Well, flags were ordered lowered by the president for 3 days. The president has been tweeting about the 100,000 deaths today. He also said he's going to extend the time that the National Guard will operate until August to help out. We're expecting to hear from the White House press secretary in about 90 minutes, and she will certainly be asked about this. But the focus by the Trump administration in recent days has been much more on economic reopening rather than focusing on the casualties.
But what has been the political response to this, especially with the presidential elections fast approaching?
Well, you've had the presumptive Democratic Party nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, mainly relegated to his basement for the past couple of months, although he did get out on Memorial Day on Monday wearing a mask. The president seemed to make light of that a little bit. And the president himself has been recently frequently traveling, not only to go play golf over the past weekend at one of his courses in Virginia, but traveling on Air Force One to events that have focused on making ventilators and the economic recovery, but also have to some degree resembled campaign rallies on a much smaller scale. And we know the president has said he's itching to get back on the campaign trail and hold those rallies. So his focus is quite forward-looking in that regard, and trying to get the media distracted from just focusing all day long on the casualties.
All right, then, VOA's White House Bureau Chief Steve Ehrman, thank you so much for joining us on The World Today.
Happy to do it.
Away from the United States, as several European countries ease coronavirus lockdowns, governments are employing the use of track and trace apps. France is set to launch its coronavirus contact tracing app as soon as the weekend after it cleared 2 parliamentary votes. It comes as a test and trace system kicks off in England and Scotland today. Germany's forthcoming coronavirus contact tracing app will trigger alerts only if users test positive for COVID-19.
A new test and trace system has launched in England. Tracers will text, email, or call people who test positive with coronavirus and ask who they have had contact with. Any of those contacts deemed at risk of infection will be told to self-isolate for 14 days, even if they are not sick. France is also set to launch its coronavirus contact tracing app as soon as the weekend after it cleared 2 parliamentary votes. The Stop COVID app will supplement work already being done by a French team of human contact tracers who are trying to identify people who may be infected with the disease but are unaware of the fact. Scotland is to relax some restrictions from Friday, allowing people to meet those from other households outside. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says the number of people meeting between the 2 households should not exceed a maximum of 8 people, and meetings should not take place with a different household within the same day. Elsewhere, Russia's recorded death toll has passed 4,000, with its confirmed case total rising to 379,051, still the second highest figure in the world. The reported number of dead is far lower than in other countries, but critics fear in reality it could be far higher. South Korea, which was the first hotspot of the virus outside China, but had managed to bring new infections down to a single-digit trickle, is now reporting a spike in cases due to a growing cluster linked to a logistics center. The country has reported 79 new virus infections for the past day, the largest daily increase since April 5th.
And hopefully we're going to come in.
And finally, U.S. President Donald Trump has tweeted that the country passing 100,000 deaths amid the coronavirus is a very sad milestone. The U.S. has seen more fatalities than any other country, while its 1.69 million confirmed infections account for about 30% of the worldwide total. President Trump has insisted that without his administration's actions, the death toll would be 25 times higher, though critics have accused him of a slow response.
The World Health Organization says about 159,000 more people in 24 European countries have died since early March than would have been expected, with a significant proportion of the spike linked to COVID-19. So far, more than 2 million people in Europe have been sickened by the coronavirus, up 15% over the past 2 weeks, with Russia, Turkey, Belarus and Britain leading the way in new infections. While the figure for excess deaths takes into account all mortality causes, Katie Smallwood, a WHO emergency official, said its timing, recorded as thousands of people were dying in intensive care units in places like northern Italy, France, Spain and Britain, points to COVID-19's deadly impact.
As of this week, there have been over 2 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 across the region, and tragically, over 175,000 people have died. Perhaps a less reported but equally alarming figure is that since early March, more than 159,000 excess deaths coinciding with the pandemic have been reported from 24 European countries. These are deaths above and beyond what we would have expected normally at this time of the year.
Thanks for staying with us. The European Commission says it wants to set up a permanent reserve of essential drugs and medical equipment to address shortages that have dogged the EU for years and have worsened throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The stockpile would use funds from a new health budget worth €9.4 billion, which the EU Executive Commission proposed on Tuesday. Among items that the EU is seeking to stockpile are disinfectants, reagents for testing, protective gear, and essential medicines.
Our first objective needs to be better prepared to react and protect our citizens should a similar cross-border threat and crisis hit us in the future. To do so, we will aim to ensure that we have at all times the means of the necessary personal protective equipment, medicines, medical devices available, and to ensure that they are affordable and innovative. Never again do we want to see our healthcare workers having to choose which patient receives life-saving equipment. EU for Health will enable us for the first time to create strategic stockpiles so we can plan ahead and have reserves in cases of crisis.
It's about building resilience in our health system. It's helping us create stockpiles of material that we need, trying to introduce a robust EU dimension that complements effectively the shortcomings that our national health systems manifested in the beginning of the crisis.
Well, back in the United States, with California starting to reopen after the coronavirus pandemic ground life to a halt, Santa Clara Valley Medical Center in San Jose is trying to get back on track. Revenue-generating elective surgeries and procedures, which were shut down during the height of the pandemic, have now returned. Patients are slowly trickling in for everything ranging from joint replacements to reconstructive surgeries. But doctors say the hospital there is returning to is not the same.
Now that because of the shelter in place, we're seeing the number of hospitalizations and COVID cases go down. All of the defensive measures that you're going to see are going to be available indefinitely. When 9/11 occurred, that was a genesis for the TSA, and 20 years later, it's still here. Since COVID has started, we don't know how long that threat will last. So all of this infrastructure we put in place, all of the defensive measures, all the safety measures will need to be in place because COVID is not the only disease out there.
Away from the COVID-19 pandemic and back to one of our main stories today, China's parliament has backed security legislation for Hong Kong, which would make it crime to undermine Beijing's authority in the territory. Well, clashes have already broken out in Hong Kong, one in the legislative parliament, as parliament debated a different proposed law which would make it a crime to disrespect the Chinese national anthem. Hundreds of people have already been arrested over protest over that, and also the new Hong Kong security law. Well, Professor Bola Akiterewa, the Director General of the Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, joins us now to take a look at this developing situation. Professor Akiterewa, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Following last year's mass protests in Hong Kong and the backlash that followed, and now this, which is already drawing protests, what do you think China's play is here with Hong Kong and this security law?
I want to believe that the Beijing authorities are simply trying to reaffirm that Hong Kong and the Hong Kongers are part and parcel of mainland China. Secondly, that the Chinese government, the Beijing authorities, are not in any way ready to negotiate the secession of Hong Kong. Thirdly, they are trying to re-emphasize that the agreement reached in 1997, yes, that time when the British handed over Hong Kong to the Chinese, the agreement that one country, two systems does not imply autonomy. And more importantly, they are trying to say that in this case, if the Hong Kongers embark on any action that will be detrimental to their own belief that Hong Kong is part and parcel of Chinese territory, they will not be prepared to accommodate that. They will not tolerate that. I think that's the rule and the message that the Chinese government is trying to send across to them and to the whole world.
Activists in Hong Kong, though, fear that this law would come with a loss of certain freedoms. How exactly will a China-imposed security law change the city?
Certainly. When that's what they call the basic law, which was more or less an agreement done in 1997. That particular basic law provides for the city to have its own internal security arrangement. But this time, since the Chinese are backing, Karilan in their draft law, which is also called draft decision. And that draft law provides for the possibility of the Chinese government to interfere and intervene to maintain law and order. There's no way the draft, law, when it eventually comes into force in September, it will affect the status of Hong Kong.
All right, then, Professor Bola Akinterewa, the Director General of the Polytech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Thank you so much once again for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
To some positive news now. At 111, Joanna Zuninga has become the oldest patient in Chile to recover from COVID-19. Zuninga tested positive after an outbreak at a care home in Santiago, where she is the oldest resident. Well, let's also look at what's happening in Brazil, where a 92-year-old woman from Brazil's Amazon region received a standing ovation from doctors following a full recovery from the coronavirus. Lazaria Lopez hails from the Banewa tribe and is thought to be the oldest indigenous coronavirus patient to beat the virus. She doesn't speak Portuguese, but is grateful to doctors in aiding her recovery. Although official documents from the state put Lopez's age at 92, locals say the tribal matriarch is more than 100 years old. On Wednesday, another 3 indigenous coronavirus patients were discharged from hospital, providing hope to a region of Brazil that has been devastated by the pandemic. Some positive news there. We all need positive news during this time. Thank you so much for watching The World Today. I'm Teniola Shoboale.